We're now going to turn for a historical turn. Obviously, there's a lot in the contemporary world about veganism, but there's also kind of nothing new about this. So it's my pleasure to welcome Victoria Addinall to talk about Eustace Miles. Do you know which one?
Yeah, I think it's this.
That one, okay.
Yeah.
Who was a really interesting early 20th century figure who was quite local to this area. So I think he's done some fabulous research. Look forward to hearing about it.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks to all the organisers at Inform as well. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Suzanne said, I'm going to offer a bit of a historical perspective, and it's based on some research I did for my MA dissertation at SOAS in the traditions of yoga and meditation, and a slight adaptation on that. So I would like to transport you back to Edwardian London, the thriving cosmopolitan hub of the British Empire, shaped by industrial, commercial and scientific advances, a growing current of social reform and a population concerned more than ever with the importance of health and bodily well-being. In this context, vegetarianism evolved beyond its roots in sectarian Christian Puritanism. And though while many still saw a flesh-free diet as a path to spiritual and moral purity, new motivations emerged, including vitality, economy, and ease, reflecting the changing needs and interests of the modern and metropolitan man and woman. So over the next 10 minutes, we'll explore this vibrant setting through the lens of one key historical figure, and we'll consider how the dynamics of the 20th century, this 20th century locale, may continue to shape vegetarianism today. So, who was Eustace Miles? Eustace Hamilton Miles, though little known today, was a celebrity in early 20th century Britain and one of a charismatic group of popular physical culturists seen to be leading the health of the nation. A famed international tennis player, Miles was also a vocal vegetarian and food reformer, representative of a new model of health defined by qualities of self-discipline and moral restraint over strength and bulging muscles. Miles's journey to flesh-free eating was one driven by health. After eating and drinking to excess in his 20s, Miles credits a meat-free diet as helping him to feel altogether better in every way, and he subsequently became a vocal and celebrated advocate for a diet of what he preferred to label simpler foods. If Miles had lived today, I'm pretty certain he would have had a rather large social media following. This being the opening decades of the 20th century, he was a prolific and popular author. His advice literature spanned physical and mental health, vegetarian cookery, sportsmanship and spirituality. He published a periodical, Health with Ho, was a Daily Mail newspaper columnist and a regular public speaker. A flesh-free, nutritious diet was central to his proclamations on health and self-improvement. Such was the increasing popularity of meat-free dining that even by the later decades of the 19th century, vegetarian restaurants had become an increasingly popular feature of London life, offering wholesome food and progressive new social spaces. Eustace Miles owned his own restaurant with ideals in Covent Garden in 1906 alongside his wife, fellow author and activist Hallie, pictured here. But the Eustace Miles was not just a restaurant. With Miles's reputation as an athlete and health expert at its helm, it became the epicentre of hygienic and dietary reform in London. The headline offering was a nourishing, sustaining and daintily served vegetarian meal, but its activities branched physical, mental and spiritual self-improvement and appealed to an eclectic audience of simple lifers, aspiring writers, healers, theosophists and others of an idealistic disposition. Such was the notoriety and the place of the Eustace Miles in the capital's cultural imagination that its free-spirited atmosphere features in the pages of E.M. Forster's Howard's End, when the novel's youthful, liberal protagonist, Margaret Schlegel, invites her older and more conservative suitor, Mr. Wilcox, to lunch. Before deciding otherwise, "No, you'd hate it," she said. "It's all proteins and bodybuildings and people coming up to you, and I beg your pardon, but you have such a beautiful aura." The exchange representing the societal shifts and alternative ideas circulating in the city and its vegetarian establishments. Life reformers such as Miles were able to take advantage of an increased attention on vegetarianism in the cultural zeitgeist and a growing consumer market for convenient and healthy products. Examples from the period include Allinson's wholemeal flour, grape nuts, Graham's crackers, Marmite, and the meat substitute Protos. Miles' own Emprote was marketed in different forms as both a training tool for athletes, a general supplement for a healthy diet, and a palatable food for the diabetic and obese. Pure, delicious, digestible, economical, a term used to describe the efficient provision of bodily energy as well as cost. Though not entirely clear on its ingredients, Emprote was likely to have been a kind of dried milk powder with added grains and proteins, a reflection of advances in food manufacturing and nutritional science, if not quite the natural and simple food criteria Miles promoted. Emprote was served in the Eustace Miles, in health food shops, in the form of soup powder, bread and biscuits, and promoted for its scientifically backed health benefits. Though Miles criticised the miraculous health and healing claims of advertising at the time, he was also required to balance his own ideals with his own commercial interests, a tension of motivations still perhaps present in today's multi-million-pound wellness industry. But to return to more moral interests. From its inception in 1847, the Vegetarian Society was an organisation shaped in response to the growing concerns of social degeneration in the face of modernity, hailed as a way to improve physical, intellectual and moral character, promote universal brotherhood and increase human happiness. By the Edwardian era, vegetarianism had come to be viewed as the ultimate expression of reformist sensibilities and was a shared lifestyle feature amongst a network of mutually reaffirming social causes: temperance, life reform, anti-vivisection, women's rights, prison reform, to name a few. A favoured location amongst these circles, the Eustace Miles hosted suffragette breakfasts, was a regular meeting place for the Humanitarian League and London Vegetarian Society. Though a renowned reformer himself, Miles was also keen to distance himself from any faddist reputation. As he describes here, the reformer who wears no hat, has long hair, wears no collar, tie or waistcoat, wears no socks, but sandals, a figure he admits to being a living representative of important principles, but who inspires only ridicule and disrepute. Miles, after all, was a more conservative figure and serious in his mission to improve the health of the nation and help growing urban populations to thrive. The free-thinking spirit of reformer circles was also reflected in the shifting attitudes towards established religion and, in Miles's words, the unquestioning and unhealthy attitudes and lifestyles of the average churchgoer. Miles could be described as a typical truth seeker of his day. Rather than passively receiving orthodox wisdom, he was keen to explore different ideas and find his own path. His writings encouraged others to do the same. They draw heavily on theosophical concepts and Eastern wisdom, alongside those from Christian Science, New Thought, American Transcendentalism, as well as psychology and many other pseudo-scientific ideas of the day. Miles had a particular affinity to the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, who is widely acknowledged to have introduced yoga to the West, and his particularly individualistic and experimental lens on the path to spiritual progress. As Joy Dickson has highlighted, thanks to the shared attitudes, aspirations of the individuals involved, campaigns for moral, social and political form were often combined with theosophy or a similar spirituality and presented as one combined struggle, an occult body politic directed towards improvement of the individual for the greater good and advance of humanity. A tendency neatly summarised by leading theosophist Annie Besant in her lecture on vegetarianism in the light of theosophy, when she describes those who purify their own body and life, referring here to being vegetarian, as fellow workers with the inner life of the world. Miles took perhaps a more embodied approach, but equally saw physical health, achieved through various modes of disciplined living, as an integral part of altruism, and the pursuit of health as a step on a path towards spiritual advancement. So in conclusion, the vegetarian movement in Britain was shaped by the competing social dynamics and anxieties of the Edwardian era, a productive tension that saw the convergence of moral, spiritual and health-driven values under the banner of the term vegetarianism, and a huge diversification of the motivations and identities behind the cause. Miles's role within this lively historical scene was one of celebrity influencer. He towed a commercially viable and socially acceptable line between the vegetarian advocates and sceptics of his day, challenging faddist connotations and extolling the scientifically proven health benefits of simpler foods, at once a reformer, spiritual seeker, and savvy entrepreneur. Unlike influencers today, vegetarian figureheads in the early 20th century were perhaps a little more uncomfortable about grounding their personal reforms solely in a selfish appeal to health. The argument for self-improvement of any kind was a belief in its collective impact and drive towards social betterment, a notion we can perhaps look to for inspiration as we live through our own era of rapid change. So I hope the next time you reach for some nut butter, add some protein powder to your smoothie, or sit down in your local vegetarian cafe, you might spare a thought for those Edwardian era diners donning their hats and gloves, for a visit to the Eustace Miles, for a nut cutlet and a nutritious slice of moral and spiritual fulfilment. Thank you.